Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 061 of the WA Running Podcast, as Chris and I record on Monday the 13th of January 2025. Happy New Year everyone! We hope you all had a safe and wonderful festive season. In this week's episode, we recap the anticipated Parlouf Relay that happened on Boxing Day last year, the Perth Trail Series Wallygrunta, and the WAMC Matilda Bay Run. In this week's interview, we got to chat to Gaby Villa, sports nutritionist and dietitian and founder of IntensEATfit, where we talk all things nutrition and fueling your next big race. As always, we talk a bit of warp admin with a couple of announcements in store for this year before we celebrate and gaslight our listeners and their questionable behaviours in our weapons of war. Across my screen, back in 2025, is my co-host who, along with young Henry, took on the likes of Andy Carrington and Child in the Parlouf Relay, where we find out who ended up shouting milkshakes. Chris, the Two Scoops Shaw. How are you, mate?
Two scoops, yeah. Yes. Very good. I like that. Yeah, very good. I'm very well. Yeah, didn't succeed against Andy and his son, unfortunately, but no, we all had a good time. In fact, Maddie was out there running with my sister-in-law Clemence, and they had it was like a family event. Really, it was great. Much more, I thought, as if some of the WAMC events could get even more low key. This was probably the most low key thing I've ever experienced. So it was great.
Awesome. I'll look forward to the recap of that later in the episode when we do the results there. How was the rest of your break?
Yeah, good. Super chill. Ran the whole time. It was like, when I say chill, it was a lot of staying at home but entertaining people at our place. So there was a lot of pool, a lot of swimming, and just generally good. It was good to have a break for sure, and refresh and get ready for a big 2025, hopefully.
Yeah. Oh, look, I spent the last couple of weeks in Japan. I only got back last Monday.
Yeah, we haven't actually had a chance to talk about it. I think even I've seen you in person twice since then, and I still haven't spoken about it.
Yeah, I only just got back a week ago, but I feel like I'm still freaking tired from the trip. So it was my first overseas holiday with a child, and we went with another family who have a 6-year-old, and we stayed in Osaka and Kyoto for the most part. But I have to say, fuck, I'm tired. I'm tired from that trip. Just wrangling two kids under the age of 7 around from place to place in Japan is tiring stuff. So I didn't get much running, done at all over the last sort of that 12-day period, but got a couple of sessions in when I could, and sort of leveraged off the cold weather. So my Garmin VO2 made some significant gains. I think it got up to 62 at one stage.
Jesus Christ.
In the space of a week, it's gone back to 59. So the reality of the hot weather and the reverse heat training has not worked in my favor. So I went to Japan feeling like I could make the most of buying shoes on the cheap, particularly after speaking to avid listener of the show, Jessica Smith. She went to Japan last year and she was able to score herself a lot of shoes sort of in that $100 to $150 price range. And it was true. There's a lot of shoes there that were sort of in that price range, including some Magic Speeds. Saw a pair of SC Elite 4 sort of in that price range, which is ridiculous, right? To think that you could score a pair for $150 Australian. But unfortunately, due to my fat Yeti feet, I was unable to score any shoes. And actually, I ended up getting the Nova Blast 3s in an 11.5 US, which is a half size up. So, I'm only 5'7", and I'm wearing a size 11.5, so I look like a bloody clown doing my easy runs in those shoes. But other than that, it was a pretty good trip. I did manage to get some runs, but not too much. So have you been able to get any mileage done during that break?
Yeah, I had a couple of weeks. I think I hit 100 Ks the week before last. So yeah, I had more or less consistent running all the way through. I think I treated that Parlouf Relay as a bit of a session, So didn't really have 2 sessions that week. But yeah, it's a shame you didn't pick up any shoes, mate, because I'm sure you've been talking it up for about 9 months ahead of that, and it never eventuated.
It was freaking disappointing. So I think for those that plan on going to Japan to get a pair of shoes, I think if you're under a US 9 in a men's size, I think you'll be okay. You'll be spoilt for choice. But if you're a 9.5 US and above, you're not going to get anything, unfortunately. So it was very frustrating to not pick up a pair. And I've been hyping this trip up for a while. I've even saved a lot of suitcase space for these shoes and sort of left empty hand. Well, yeah, with just a pair, which the Nova Last 3s, although a very good shoe, and had some really good reviews when it was released a couple of years back, it wasn't part of the plan. So yeah, it is what it is. But there was one anecdote that I saw on my trip. We went to a snow park on one of the days, and there was a dad who was very aggro and was a bit of a wanker from what I saw. He was berating his wife, and I don't know what they were talking about, but it seemed like he refused to pay the rental fee for snow boots. Anyway, he was wearing what looks to be a pair of Asics Magic Speeds. Like they looked very similar to mine. Anyway, so he was walking in the snow, Magic Speeds, and I think he was going up to sort of sled down the hill, and he absolutely slipped and almost face planted after berating something to his wife. Yeah. So I sort of saw karma in action, but I also saw what the Magic Speeds aren't good for, which is walking in the snow. So for those planning to do that, not recommended at all.
Yeah, keep your 5x1K on the road.
Yeah, definitely. All right, shall we go into our training week? How's your week been on the training front?
Yeah, it was a funny week. I think I overdid it this week, to be honest. I probably should have tapered for that 10K on yesterday, but we'll start off. Monday had just a 30-minute run. So it's my first day of running 7 days in, I don't know, a while now. So I did a 30-minute recovery run Monday, 8x1K at Threshold on Tuesday. It was so warm, and I reckon that run is what cooked me this week. I mean, I've done that 8x1K before, a race before, and had some success, but I think I should have curtailed the number of reps given how warm it was. I think it was like 27 degrees at 6 o'clock in the morning. So.
Yeah, you didn't think it was the 30 minutes on Monday that sent you over the
edge? Yeah, it was possibly.
Yeah.
Wednesday had 60 minutes, ran that through Kings Park, a couple of loops. Thursday did a 3x321 with Smarilli at Gallup, and did a little swim in the evening, 20 minutes in the pool, which Matt Maguire was keen to tell me how slow I was. So, granted, I was stationary in my 5 meter long pool. So, who knows how the pace and the distance are calculated, but we'll leave that up to interpretation. Friday had 60 minutes, Saturday 30 minutes, and then Sunday was Matilda Bay. I was supposed to run that with Henry. I think we'd spoken about it previously on a podcast, but he fell off his bike on the Monday, unfortunately, and has since picked up a bit of a cough. So, there was a few accusations that maybe I'd pushed him off his bike so that I could run the race on Sunday, but that wasn't the case, I can assure you. How was your week?
Okay. Yeah, not too bad. Yeah, I was wondering whether or not Karma's a bitch after pushing Henry off his bike. You paid the price by stuffing up your race yesterday. Not too bad. I feel like still feeling the effects of the Japan holiday. So on Monday, I had flown back from Japan. So Osaka back to Perth is about a 14-hour commute. Give or take. So that was the whole day on Monday. The original plan, I think, with Tina was a full training week to a certain extent. But at the airport in Hong Kong, I signed up for Matilda Bay. So that was never part of the plan. But I think there was some rumblings in our running chat about people doing Matilda Bay, and was feeling a bit of FOMO, and the weather looked all right. Yep. So I signed up to Matilda Bay, then proceeded to message Tina about my sudden plans. Yeah. So the training week sort of adjusted accordingly. So Tuesday, ended up doing 30 minutes. I think it was about 6.7 Ks, which Zane was able to make very clear that that was a backyard distance. So no plans to do herdies or any backyard ultras anytime soon. Wednesday was 50 minutes with a couple of strides. Thursday was a bit of a tune-up, so 3 by 3 minutes with a 1 minute jog in between. And then a couple of easy runs, so 40 minutes Friday and 30 minutes Saturday. And then Sunday was Matilda Bay. So look, yeah, unfortunately, my reverse heat training and my Garmin VO2 reading of 62 did not eventuate in a good 10K time yesterday, but that's okay. Forgot to mention during our break, we have made some changes. Did you want to talk about our new logo?
Yeah, you and I had talked about when we took over the podcast, potentially changing it from the get-go, but I think, trying to just get the hang of actually recording an episode and getting interviews together was kind of the building blocks of our remainder of our year last year. And so over the break while you're away, we kind of workshopped a few ideas, and we came up with something on when we did release that Saturday morning, and it looked like a fair bit of positive feedback, which has been great. So thanks to everyone who said anything on Instagram or Strava, or even a few people that mentioned things to us on Sunday, which was lovely.
Yeah, no, I'm very excited about the new logo, because what that means is we then move on to the next stage, which is whether or not we change the intro. What do you reckon?
I don't know. That's a tough one. What are we going to replace it with? That's the question. We haven't talked about this, but I did notice that another reputable podcast has potentially taken some of the sound bites from our podcast and started using them as their transition noises. So we'll have to wait and see what.
I think I know you've mentioned to me previously that you like to annoy your children by playing the start of the podcast with this particular intro, and my daughter does associate the intro with Daddy's podcast, so it'd be a shame if we let it go, but maybe we could do perhaps a remix of the intro, because we do have a lot of musically talented people in the running community. So I'm sort of pointing my finger at Jack Sirrett and Nick John, who can play instruments very well. So maybe they can whip up a remix of the intro, and it could be a new feature.
I'd love that, actually. It's a great idea.
So yeah, we'll do the call out to any musically gifted people and that listens to our podcast to send us a remix version, and we'll see if it makes the cut.
Sick.
Shall we go to results? So we'll start with the Marathon Club Parlouf Relay, which was on Boxing Day. So how did it all go, Chris?
Yeah, I guess the milkshake bet, as I mentioned earlier, between myself and Andy Carrington. Unfortunately, Andy seems to have picked up a sciatica or something, which is terrible, about a week before that race. But nevertheless, didn't stop them from beating us by about 80 odd meters. So Henry and I completed 6.88 kilometers. Henry did his 3 laps. I did 3.88, I guess Henry was running those at around, I think he ran at least one of them at about 5:30. I think we figured out he averaged about 5:40 a kilometre or something, which is pretty impressive. And luckily I was running the Ks off of that about 5 minutes 40 rest, so it enabled me to give it a bit more on the backside. But Andy and his son Oliver ran 6.95 kilometres. So just edging us out, but no milkshakes, because there was no, I thought there was going to be a coffee cart or something there, but like I said, pretty low key. It was all assembled in about 20 minutes and then it was all disassembled in about 20 minutes. So it was great. It was good.
Fair enough. There's a bit of an IOU then, right?
Yeah. And I think maybe we have to wait till Andy's back's better and have another crack. Maybe it's like a double or nothing thing, Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. So the actual results that mean anything, in the women's, we had Janelle Consolis and Elle Franklin running 7.9 kilometres, which I think, from memory of what was discussed on the day, may have been a record for the female race, and potentially that was very close to completing 8 kilometres, obviously. So incredible effort there. In the men's, we had Max Davidson and Jack Sirrett It says 9.99 kilometres on the WAMC website, but I have absolute authority that I was there, and they completed their 10 laps and a little bit more. So I think they were about 10.05 in the end, which, I think running sub 3 minute Ks, on what was unexpectedly, at least for me, like sand, grass, and about 100 meters of road. So it was pretty tough running. It was more like a cross country, to be honest. And then the mixed result was Adam Williams and Astrid Roberts completing 8.88 kilometers. So
pretty impressive.
Very impressive.
So we'll move on to the Perth Trail Series Wallygrunta that I believe was on the 5th of Jan. So like all PTS events, they seem like they like their Johnny Walkers. So all their courses are named after Johnny Walkers. So the black horse, Pierce Bresman, was the winner and this is in the men's, so completing in 1 hour and 1 minute 59 seconds, with Mason Newton and Kai Metzner rounding out the men's podium. In the women's, we had Kirsten Bust in 1 hour and 13 minutes, with Petra Georgian and Victoria Hun rounding out the women's podiums. In the blue label course, we had Kaylin Bennett in 40 minutes 43 seconds, with Adam Pryor and Raphael Kimberly Bowen rounding out the men's podium. And in the women's, we had Rachel Jovic in 50 minutes 32 seconds, with Emma Miller and Angela Milne rounding out the podium there. The green label, the Johnny Walker green label course, we had Austin Coulthard in 20 minutes and 6 seconds, with Nick Errol and Ryan Steele in the men's podium. And in the women's, we had Ebony Regan in 21 minutes 56 seconds, with Polly Phillips and Kelly Guest coming second and third. Shall we move to the Strive program? D, that was on Friday night.
Yeah, sure. We had the 3,000 metres on Friday night. So in the women's, we had Amy Buckingham winning it in a time of 9 minutes 55 seconds, followed by Mia Waters and Quinn Bendarich. In the men's, we had Kieran Tibbles in a time of 8 minutes 24 seconds, followed by Max Davidson and Liam Dardengo.
So we had the Matilda Bay Run. That was over the weekend. So we'll start with the 4K. In the men's, we had Riley Digney who won it in 14 minutes flat. Second place was Drew Langford in 14 minutes and 15 seconds, and Edwin Bentley running out the men's podium in 14 minutes and 45 seconds. In the women's, we had Rach Nathan, friend of the show, winning it in 17 minutes and 11 seconds. Hayley Shoemaker coming second in 17 minutes and 17 seconds, and Emily Murray in 18:24. In the 10K, we'll start with the women's. We had Nira Jarab winning it in 36 minutes and 3 seconds, so it's great to see Nira back racing. We had Sarah Greenwood coming second in 37 minutes and 16 seconds, and I believe it was her birthday yesterday, so happy birthday Lauren French, who came third in 37 minutes 40 seconds. In the men's, first place came first in 34 minutes 20 seconds. Ben Tay came second in 34 minutes 50 seconds, and Russell Paul came third in 35 minutes and 3 seconds. And there's a reason why we've not mentioned the first place in the 10K. Chris and I have taken a stand this year after we've heard many incidents over the last year featuring this individual who's shown no remorse for a lot of his actions over the last year, which included a lot of incidents relating to physical and verbal aggression to a lot of running community members, whether it be a park run or whether it be a marathon club event. And it's safe to say that we don't really tolerate that sort of behaviour in the running community. So for this year, we're not going to mention this individual's name, despite the fact that he's pretty quick. It's a shame that he's not a inclusive and welcoming member of the WA running community. So if you want to know who won the 10K at the Matilda Bay Run, feel free to go to the WA Marathon Club website, and I think we'll leave it at that.
Yeah, sounds good, so.
We'll move on to the 24 park runs in 24 hours. How did that go?
Yeah, to be honest, this wasn't even on my radar, Simon. I completely kind of slipped my mind, but saw it started on the Saturday, and we had several Perth runners completing all 24. We had a lot of part-timers turn up for a few, but we had Big Kev, his second in a row, actually, 24 in 24. We had Michael Head completing his third year in a row. Cameron Hoare, third finish. He's done 2 in WA and 1 in South Australia. James White, Daniel Taborski, Shane Young, and Dane Sproxton, who we understand is 14 and potentially the youngest finisher with a 4 minute 50 per K average over the 24 hours, which I'd be interested to know what the prescription is for a 14-year-old's weekly mileage, but I'd say that he probably exceeded it in one day. Potentially a new Phil Gore there. So look, incredible effort, Dane. Just hope hope you're feeling well and you're recovering and taking it a little bit easier this week.
And look, I don't know if this running podcast is going to go on for another 14 years, but it would be interesting to see what his potential is in 14 years' time, whoever takes over from us, I think. These guys aren't just crazy. They are doing it for a good cause. So they are fundraising for a charity called On My Feet, which is a charity that support rough sleepers. So what we'll do is we'll put a link to the donation page on our socials when we release the app. I believe last time I checked, donations were sitting at around $6,500. So, and I think they're aiming for 10 grand. So,
nice.
So any donations would be appreciated. We've got a couple of anecdotes from in running news. Did you want to cover that very quickly?
Yeah, just real touch on it quickly. So everybody had talked about how Sydney Marathon's going to be a big major this year and how tough it might be to get into. But from what we gathered, it was about 100% success rate. So we saw lots of entries, a lot of people spruiking their $250 bank debits that just appeared overnight. So congratulations to everyone who got into Sydney Marathon. We had Kai here heading to what we finally found out was that he was heading to the University of Minnesota. There was a lot of conjecture. I saw a few posts on Strava, which did make it slightly confusing for a little while, but Kai's made 3 Aussie teams. He's won 3 national medals, including a national title, and set 2 WA records. So all the best, Kai, on your trip over to the US.
Beautiful. All right, so we'll move on to our weekly interviews. So this week we got chatting to Gaby Villa. So Gaby is a dietitian and a sports nutritionist that is based here in Parlouf, Perth. She's worked with some pretty heavy hitters, which includes the likes of Phil Gore and Aaron Young in the ultra game scene. So here's our chat with Gaby Villa. All right, so our guest today is a respected dietitian and sports nutritionist based in Perth, specialising in working with triathletes and ultra runners, working with some heavy hitters of the ultra running game that includes Perth's own Phil Gore. Gaby Villa from the IntensEATfit. Welcome to the WA Running Podcast.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for the invite.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. So what's your origin story, your relationship with sports, and how did you get into the nutritional side of sports performance?
Yeah, so I'm originally from Mexico, in case people are wondering where that accent is from. And so that's where I grew up, and I come from a family who are passionate about the sport. My dad, since we were very little, as like me and my siblings, he was always keen on us practicing some sport, and gymnastics, martial arts, and eventually swimming for me was the one that I enjoyed more. And this was when I was 12 years old. And I remember having conversations with my dad because he will always have that sort of like motivational speaker approach to things. And he would say, like, can you see how being part of the swim team is making you more responsible and having more discipline? And look at actually, he didn't mention this part, but I could also see other parts where I have friends that share something in common with me. I definitely enjoy that I'm doing something for my body. So all these things from then was, I love this and I love being involved in this and I want to be part of this for the rest of my life. Now, I've never seen myself as a very talented athlete. So even then, I mean, I was obviously enjoying the sport, but I saw my role more as like, when I stay here, I want to be someone who helps people continue to enjoy the sport as much as I am doing it now as essentially a kid. So obviously, years went by, and I had this idea in my head. I want to be in a sport. So when the time came to choose a degree, the idea of doing physical education to me didn't sound as appealing, and that was the only avenue I could see then to be involved in the sport. Mm-hmm. But then I was reviewing the curriculum for dietetics, and in the particular university where I did this degree, it was essentially Bachelor of Nutrition and Wellness. When I look at the part of wellness, they are talking about the sports nutrition and exercise science and physical activity. And my eyes just went like, this is amazing. I just can't believe that if I go into nutrition, I can help people with that component. I can be involved in the sport through nutrition and physical activity. Now, that is the part of becoming eventually a sports nutritionist. And that is something that I think from day one, going into dietetics was what I wanted to do. I remember going into the classes and everything and meeting my classmates. And a lot of people were like, oh, I'm not sure if I want to do clinical, and I'm not sure if I want to eventually work with pregnant ladies or anything like that. And in my case, it's like, no, a sport. That's what I'm here for. And even before then, with swimming, actually, that's how I ended up in sports nutrition, how I ended up loving the sport of endurance. I mean, swimming is obviously an endurance sport already, but when there was a year that they did a triathlon in the city where I'm from. This is a small city triathlon, was just starting. I've never heard of triathlons before. And my cousin tried to organize a relay because we have so many people in the family who are cyclists and runners and swimmers. So eventually we assembled some relays with the family. I was, of course, in charge of the swim part. It was such a short triathlon, but I finished that and I was like, this is incredible. I want to do this again, but I want to do it on my own. So from then I was hooked. I absolutely love the sport. And essentially, it's been now 20 years since that day that I love this thing. And essentially, that pretty much strengthened my journey into, yes, I love this as a triathlete, but I also want to be there helping other people enjoy the sport and be part of this and have a more meaningful experience through it.
So were you swimming all the way through while you were sort of studying at university? And did that continue all the way through, or did you get into triathlons from an early age and that sort of progressed through during your studies?
So I continued to swim till I was like, I think in high school. And from then in high school, I got into the athletics team and doing other things. But essentially, I was 15 years old when I did that relay triathlon. So all my high school, I was a triathlete, and I'm saying quote unquote, because my triathlon training was, okay, I do my athletics training, which was just going around the track. I don't think I was still swimming as like consistently back then. And my cycling training was a week before the local triathlon that happened once a year. I would go with my brother, and we would just go to this street up and down. And the objective was, let's make sure Gaby doesn't fall off the bike when she tries to get off the bike. That was the objective. It was like, as long as I can transition from the bike to the run, the training is going amazingly.
The plan was to kill everyone in the swimming and then just survive in the other.
Exactly. I remember, and I've shared this several times because I think back of it, and I think it's really cute. The day I finished my first triathlon on my own, that was an entire distance. It was really, really short, shorter than a sprint triathlon. I was using, I don't know if you guys remember, I would use Messenger as like that Windows Messenger to communicate, and you could change your username. Yeah. So I changed mine to Iron Girl from my short triathlon. But anyway, from there, high school was like that. When I moved to do my degree in nutrition, this was obviously the university, and there was no triathlon team then. I went into the cycling team. So that's how there was a triathlon happening in one of the years. And we were there, and I met other people who were part of the university. I was like, oh, so you're interested in triathlon? Me too, and you too. Like, so eventually we created the triathlon club in the university. And from there, I still think of them as my best friends, my family. It was just such an incredible experience to have that thing in common with them. And I guess you can see how like that social aspect for me has been critical in terms of enjoying the sport so much.
Yeah, definitely. And so I guess that kind of explains our next question in some ways of how like your relationship with running or with endurance sport and cycling and swimming, is carried through to the sports nutrition and dietetics. But I guess was there a point when you were, when you were 15, doing that first triathlon, were you aware of that's where you wanted to go in your degree, or did that come once you graduated from high school?
Yes, the degree of nutrition and dietetics came as I was graduating from high school, because that's when I was starting to look at what I was going to do specifically. Yeah. But yeah, since I was probably earlier than 15 years old, I already knew that I wanted to be in a sport. Back then, I think my mind was more into I want to be a coach. But from there, once as I said, once I saw the degree, I was, no, I think I prefer this 100%.
So let's talk about your business, IntensEATfit. I guess from the outside, we've seen it grow significantly in the last year, and even more recently, we saw a lot of people in Perth sporting the IntensEATfit merch. I saw some hats at the Founders Cup Marathon Club event towards the end of last year. Talk to us about how that business came about, and what are some of the things that you would work with the clients?
Yeah, absolutely. So trying to make the story short, because essentially the transition from Mexico to Australia was because I wanted to study a master's degree in exercise and health. And it was mostly to continue to strengthen that path for me as a sports nutrition. I already had other qualifications, and I just wanted to have my international experience and more understanding of the sport side of it. So that's how I ended up here. But my plan was, okay, I have my degree, I have my international experience, go back home. Life essentially threw things at me, including my husband now. So I ended up staying here. And back in Mexico, before moving here, I actually had my own practice as well, where I was already working with, I'll say, active people. It was definitely a sports nutrition geared, but in terms of the people I was working with, yes, triathletes, lots of CrossFitters, people who were doing gym. So it was a little bit more, let's say, miscellaneous in terms of the sport side of it. When I moved here, I complete my degree and eventually ended up staying working in a department of health, nothing to do with nutrition when I was doing that. And of course, the pandemic hits, and I don't know actually if this is related to the pandemic or how it happened, but back then, actually still is, Kate Baldwin from what was Endurance Movement was my physio. And she was telling me, Gaby, why you're not doing the sports nutrition here? I can see how many people will benefit from you helping from that aspect. And I can see how much you love this. You should start working here and start helping people. So that, of course, planted the seed. And I was like, oh, I'm not sure. And because I'm still very grateful with Kate, because, of course, she helped me in getting that introduction to the Western Australian community as well. And at the start, it was, okay, let's see how this goes. Let's start seeing some people. But very quickly, it grew into, the brand and everything. I have a friend who specializes in marketing, and she helped me with essentially rebranding, because back in Mexico, my brand was Intensity Advanced Sports Nutrition. And in terms of the branding, my friend helped me like IntensEATfit, because it's something unique and has all the blend of the things that I want. And because I'm a triathlete, I'm in the triathlon community, I personally definitely love a sport as like an endurance sport. Even when I was in Mexico, I was in charge of in the State Institute of Sport where I was working with the kayaking, rowing, and sailing teams. And those are also very geared in endurance. Focusing on endurance made absolutely more sense. So that's how pretty much, I think it was 2021 that I started to see clients here. And I am so grateful to the community, because it started to grow so quickly with people, recommendations, word of mouth, having conversations and presentations with groups, like, for example, with Ultra Series and other triathlon clubs. So that's how essentially it started to grow. And of course, the more I've been doing this, the more niching into even ultra endurance is shifting towards as well.
Yeah, for sure. I guess, and Instagram must form a huge part of that as well. The word of mouth is one thing, but then obviously having these kind of reels or viral videos effectively that you create to be able to deliver very short, sharp bits of information must be very time consuming, but how do you go about kind of putting those together, and do you have a plan, or is it something you kind of work with on a whim?
Oh, I would love to tell you that I have a plan and there's a whole strategy behind it. I want to one day finally have something like that. Because, I would say my relationship with Instagram is a bit of a love-hate relationship. It is quite frustrating sometimes thinking of what to say and how to say it and what is the right timing. I have a tendency for perfectionism, which last year I learned is not the best thing to have. And what that does to me is that sometimes I see things on Instagram and I want to do them. Everything has to be as perfect as possible, and that stops me from putting things out there. Now, what makes me love it is that when I put something out there, the feedback from people is, oh, that's so helpful. Thank you, Gaby. It's great to hear this. And I get DMs from people saying, hey, I actually follow that thing that you say on your reel, and I have more energy because I'm actually eating before my sessions. Or thanks for that recipe. That was fantastic. So that is what's the fuel that keeps me going with the Instagram, because I definitely see the benefit that depending on where people are, not everybody is going to go straight into, oh, let's work together. But if I can help someone by making that shift in, this is why nutrition matters, this is why you can see at your food from this perspective, and don't believe what they tell you in terms of things that could be quite harmful for someone's health and performance, then my day is done. I'm very happy with that. And yes, of course, it definitely is helpful. Like, for example, I know you mentioned I'm working with Phil Gore. Yes, whenever he shares something about me, I can see the impact it has, and like how obviously his audience is bigger than mine. So it's great to have that opportunity where maybe before the social media, we had that word of mouth that yes, you mention it to someone and it's 1-2 people listening. And now we can expand that to effectively hundreds and thousands of people, which is absolutely incredible.
Yeah, it's incredible to see like how fast it grows, considering it's, been roughly 4 years, you're saying, since it all began, and now it's massive. But I guess with the new year coming around, people have started to plan and sign up for races for 2025, and that may include marathons, ultras, or backyards potentially, and some of those being for the very first time. The world of nutrition and performance can sometimes be overwhelming, and like you say, there's a bit of misinformation out there on some YouTube channels or Instagrams, and so what are some of the general starting points for people that they should be considering from a nutritional point of view for training blocks through to their race strategies?
Yeah, so for someone who's very, very new to the sport, my advice is often trying to keep it as simple as possible. I often think of, for example, when I described that first triathlon I did, and if someone had come to me and say like, oh, you need to have energy gels and sports drinks, and have you considered that you need carbon plated shoes? That of course didn't exist then, but all these other things, I would be like, I can't do this. I need so many things. That triathlon I did it with my mom's bike that weighed probably 30 kilos. I probably wouldn't have if I had all these things in my head, which I feel like people now have, which is incredible because it means that if you obviously want to grow, you can see those things. But as a beginner, it can be super overwhelming. And for some people, it can essentially be off-putting or make the experience absolutely a disaster. Because if, let's say, someone goes into their first race and someone has been telling them that Kipchoge it's 120 grams of carbohydrate an hour and they would need to have 4 to 5 energy gels an hour, and they just go and do that, of course, the whole experience is going to be a disaster. So how do we start simple? In terms of starting simple, which I can see why it's overwhelming, because even saying like, okay, I need to eat healthy, even the eating healthy, what does that mean? If we look at, depending your favorite influencer or person, some person is going to say that the keto diet is the healthy way of going, that having the Mediterranean diet, which is what most, let's say, associations will endorse. So there are so many things that even that is conflicting. So let's say in terms of starting from scratch is, okay, let's look first at what you are currently doing and how can we start incorporating things that will make this better for you. Instead of clean slate, from now on, I'm following this diet, from now on, I'm going to eat all these things. So it's more about little by little. And in an ideal situation, the nutrition is progressing alongside the training, right? I will hope no one is saying, okay, I'm going to run a marathon and they've never done a shorter event and they just go straight in 3 months wanting to do a marathon. So of course that is going to be quite abrupt, and there's no amount of nutrition that can make that experience more comfortable. So it is if while you are starting that journey is almost going at the same rate in terms of how training is progressing, we're progressing those suggestions, definitely helpful. Like once if we get to more advanced things in terms of, yes, if you're going to be exercising for longer than an hour, being more mindful about having some form of carbohydrate with you is going to be helpful. But literally having a Gatorade bottle is enough in that situation. Once we continue to progress, it's like, okay, let's just start refining this and let's get to a point where we keep getting those 1%ers essentially. But yeah, the advice is definitely, let's keep it simple. Let's not overwhelm you. Let's make this experience as enjoyable as possible.
Yeah, I can imagine like for those that perhaps are doing the marathon for the first time and they get thrown a lot of marketing their way around, oh, you need to buy a whole bunch of Morden gels and consume for an hour just to finish a marathon. A, that's very expensive. But B, like, yeah, the people might not even really want to do a marathon if they find out that you're going to have to invest in all this gels or nutrition along with your shoes and the amount of training that you would need to do a marathon. So yeah, I guess you're right. It's really about starting simple, but then find out what your needs are and then build from there to see and I guess progress marathon after marathon.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have people and listeners who perhaps are doing marathons for the first time or perhaps thinking of transitioning, going from, a road marathon through to a trail or an ultra through to perhaps doing, Herdies for the first time this year. I imagine that there are probably different needs and considerations as you're transitioning from one thing to another. What do you find are some of the common mistakes that people do, perhaps when they're transitioning from, the conventional road race through to perhaps a point-to-point ultra race through to Herdies where it's a 6.7k lap every hour by the hour. So what are some of the sort of mistakes or common issues that people run into when they transition?
So the biggest mistake I see is that, because that is, let's say, a very natural progression. Is I always get surprised when I hear someone that went straight into ultras without coming from road running. But anyway, if we are coming from that background of doing road races, the biggest mistake I see is that the, let's say, approach for a marathon normally is very sugary based in terms of energy gels, carbohydrate drinks. Most of the time, energy gels, I would say on average, is what most people use. And as we transition through ultras or backyard ultras or essentially longer distance, assuming that because during the marathon you were able to consume X amount of carbohydrate per hour by using these products, all you have to do is, okay, now I need to do is a longer race. I'll just use more of this, right? And that is if they maintain the rate. It's like, let's say they were eating 70 grams an hour. Okay, so for my ultra, I'll just need to eat these many per hour and continue having these products. And the thing is that very likely for that person, that marathon was successful. They didn't have any issues. They didn't get sick of the sweetness. They could tolerate it well. But as you transition to ultras, there are several factors to consider here. One, which is the most obvious one, is significantly longer. So it means that if over the course of the marathon you were eating, let's say, a total of 10 to 10 gels, over here we're translating that to 20 or more if we were to replicate the strategy. And there are very few people who could nail that. And the next to consider as well is that as we move to ultra endurance, for most people the intensity will go lower, which means that the marathon, the pace and the rate at which you are racing it is different as if you are doing in ultra. And that means that the rate at which your body is using carbohydrate is not going to be the same. So that is probably the biggest mistake I see. The other one is that this is very famous in the ultra endurance world, is the classic, and there's a popular sports drink brand that I have nothing against it. Like more than half of my clients use it. But the thing is that the recommendation is 2 scoops in 500 ml and just drink that bottle every hour and you'll be successful at your race because it has sodium, it has carbohydrate, you are getting hydrated. Sounds like it didn't come through. And then if we look at the recommendations, it's literally ticking all the boxes. It's literally the right amount of carbohydrate, the right amount of electrolytes. But the thing that we don't consider, and this is something I often talk about in my presentations and when I speak with people, is that when we look at the objective of nutrition for a race, the objective is not to say, oh, we need this many carbohydrates, this many electrolytes, this many fluid. The objective of the nutrition is consistent energy, avoid gut issues, keep you going through the race with the conditions of the race as well. So what is available at the aid stations? How many stops do you have? And that strategy, as simple and as straightforward as it sounds, for most people, the longer they go for, the harder it is to maintain. And that's where the issues start: flavor fatigue, gut upset, even lack of energy, because you get to the point where, like, seriously, it is impossible to eat. Many people assume that they can just push through, you can just literally force it down. And it's not working. Your body literally rejects it. So what happens? There's no energy in that case. So yes, I hope people listening I don't think that this is super difficult to achieve, but I would say the biggest lesson here is know that even though some things that we use for road races work, when we transition to trail running and ultras, there are things that we need to change as part of it to keep the experience more comfortable.
And I imagine, running a marathon, let's just say you'll be running at a higher level of intensity. So it means that perhaps your only options are quite limited to a gel or an energy drink. Whereas once you start tapping into the ultra game and so the backyard ultras, you're probably going at a lesser intensity. And therefore you're afforded the ability to try the variety of foods and as part of your energy source.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, for example, recently we've been hearing stories of people who are like very essentially professional ultra runners who are using that strategy of energy gels and sports drinks and achieving really high grams of carbohydrate per hour. The thing is that those are professional runners that very likely are pushing really, really high intensities. So because for most people that intensity is not going to be as high, the body is not using that carbohydrate at that rate as we're consuming it. So it definitely makes it quite challenging for the whole experience to be as successful as possible. And incorporating some food and some variety and some savory options, what that does is that it continues to supply the energy for your body. It gives the whole, I would say, digestive tract an opportunity to have a break from flavor, from how you're processing things, from even the enzymes that you're using to break down this food. All these things, it's way more helpful to have when I say a race strategy, it's not about this thing every hour on the hour. It's about, okay, what are the things that we're going to go through and how are we going to distribute them across the race? So that way we achieve all those nutrients, like carbohydrate, electrolytes, etc., but with a wider range of options.
Part of it comes down to like training your gut as well, right? To be able to process these things over long periods of time. And I guess doing it for a marathon, you might be doing your 35K long run on a Sunday and, taking your 6 gels or whatever it is, that's a relatively easy thing to do. But if you're training for a race that's, say, 80 kilometers long, like the Margaret River Ultra, then, trying to eat, the packets of chips and pasta and all these things that you tend to see at aid stations, it's kind of hard to practice to do that. I guess when someone comes to you with as a client, how do you kind of direct them to be able to do that? Like, are they starting their mornings having eaten all of this stuff and then going out for their run, or
Yeah. So there are different ways we can train our gut, and the easiest and quickest way of starting is actually eating before runs. As in, I'm not saying eat a instant noodles or whatever they're going to give you at that aid station. It's literally, please have a banana before you head on your run.
Yeah.
That is something that I see time and time again. It's not most people, but it's not unusual. When someone comes to me saying, I'm struggling a lot with my gut, I don't understand what's going on, I did try this during training. And then when we explore what exactly has been going on, most of the morning run sessions, which are, let's say, 1 hour, they are easy. They are not eating anything before the run. And then, I did try this during training, was I went on my run and I had 1 energy gel. Like, I did try it, but we didn't try having the 5 or everything else. So a really good starting point is getting your gut used to eating beforehand to start with. And with that is have a banana, have a piece of toast, have a muesli bar. What that does is, first is training your gut. Second is giving you energy that you're going to use during the run. So it's not something that goes to waste. It's actually really helpful. And even with that, you are helping your body to recover easier. Then in terms of which it's a challenge in terms of we're looking at ultras, and there's going to be more variety in terms of the food options, as in chips and cookies and instant noodles and things that of course during training is almost impossible to test. The recommendation is, okay, let's work with what we can, right? Because of course for a training session, I'm not going to ask you to carry something that halfway you need to be pouring hot water to make it.
Yeah.
But you can carry a sandwich, or you can carry a boiled potatoes. So those options are similar, let's say, depending on what strategy you're going with. And it's going to be very helpful for the person to start gaining that confidence as well. Especially, I would say that's another mistake when we come from the road running background, because it's really difficult to eat while we're running, because obviously the intensity is way higher. There's, let's say, this uncertainty of how easy is going to be tolerating the food when we're transitioning to trail and ultra, where of course eating a bit, let's say, solid or food itself that could be harder to consume is going to be challenging. And yes, it's going to be challenging if you've never done it, but is it something that week upon week, when you go on your long runs, you are practicing, that confidence, of course, increases, and your body's ability to process it as well.
I'm kind of going a little bit off topic again, so I apologize in advance. But so I guess one of the things that I hear about a lot, and someone who has no nutritional background at all, is, we hear about complex carbs, simple carbs, micronutrients, all these different things, right? Do all of those things form an intake of all of those things? Are they kind of encouraged when someone's training for a longer race?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually this week I was having a conversation, because there's a group session that I have with some of my clients. And I was asking the question that I think is important for everybody to be aware of. What is the first thing we need to look at when we're planning a race nutrition? And they will tell me, oh, the carbs. Oh, actually, what do I'm just eating, or how long the race is going for. And as much as that's important, the way I suggest people approaching this is, the number one thing we need to look at is, what is your race objective? What do you want to get from this race? And once you have that, because not every single race is about going and smashing it. There are races where you literally just want to have fun because all your mates are doing it. Fantastic. Yes, you will need nutrition, but maybe I don't need to tell you to eat one energy gel every 20 minutes, because the pace is going to be different, because it's not as serious, versus other races where it's a B race that you actually want to test your pacing and all these things. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this is because when we look at the nutrition strategy, once we are aware of what do we want to see once we cross that finish line, what is the objective, then it's easier to plan everything else. Because it means that, okay, I want to smash this race. I'm all in. Well, depending on at which point between now and the race we are, it means that perhaps taking risks in terms of tweaking the strategy drastically is not ideal, because we don't want the person to have experience where for some reason there were gut issues or problems. So we are like, okay, let's work with what we have. Let's just make sure that, because the intensity is going to be higher, we use what will be called simpler carbohydrates. I always say quick carbohydrates, which is pretty much more things that are geared towards the sugary part. Energy gels, carbohydrate drinks, gummies, lollies, things like that. That will be the quick carbohydrate. If the intensity is going to be like, well, it's going to be hard if it's 100 miler, for sure. No one is arguing that. But are you going to run that 100 miler at the same pace you will do the marathon? Very unlikely. So, okay, the intensity goes lower. Well, in that case, we do use a mix of complex and simple, because what we want is energy that is more sustained. And when I say complex, where that will be more like the potato, the sandwich, some rice bars and things like that. But it doesn't mean that that's all you're having. There is still the carbohydrate drink. There is the occasional energy gel. We do have some gummies, but the distribution across the race is very different compared to that approach. And I mean, I could keep going with examples of, okay, what if I want to have fun? Or what actually, if we're using this race as the B race that I want to test everything. That's when we can be riskier. It's like, okay, you know what? It will be fantastic if we test how you will go if we use these types of food, because the next race you're going to be traveling and you're not going to have access to a crew. So we actually need to make sure that you're really comfortable with the drop bags in that case. So depending on what we're looking at, that's how my recommendation will be to structure that strategy.
No, it's a great answer. Thank you. Simon's going in all in at Gold Coast this year. And just about every marathon that he's run, except for a pace job we did last October, he's cramped considerably at the 32, kind of 35K mark. For someone such as Simon, who's a kind of a heavy sweater and seems to have had these problems consistently, what are some things that he could consider to kind of get himself through those final 10Ks cramp free?
Yeah, so cramping is a topic that I'm sure I don't know if you have discussed with more people. What most people would say is complex. The reason being is because it's very difficult to study. They are so unpredictable, so that we don't have very, let's say, solid evidence on what works. Now, the first thing that for cramping it's important to look at is muscle conditioning. Now, Simon, I know you have lots of experience, so it's unlikely that's the case. That's when we start moving to other things. And in the case of other things, when we look at nutrition, being a heavy sweater, there is a potential that the dehydration component is having a role to play here. And the other one, whether you're losing electrolytes at a quantity that is impacting how your muscle contraction essentially. Most of the time will be sodium. So the first step would be to do a sweat test. And from there, what we essentially assess with that is how much sodium you're losing in your sweat, and also how much you sweat. And what that tells us is, okay, if you're going for this duration of a marathon and you are sweating this much per hour, and for every liter of sweat, you are losing this much sodium, then we can have the strategy where it's, okay, we need to replenish these from the start. So that way, by the time you get to those 32, 35K mark, you're not in deficit. We are making sure that we're making up for it. So hopefully we prevent this.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, because I think, it's strange for me because I feel like it's like clockwork. Like regardless of the intensities that I run the marathon. So I have gone faster and faster. So I think I've done 6 marathons now. And I think I always look at the clock, or I look at the K markers where I see the 30K mark. I'm like, it's coming. And then I could feel a twitch. And then it just happens within the space of a K where I'm just hobbling the way through. And I think when we did it this year, I think Chris overtook me at around K32, and that was like where it just hit all of a sudden. So yeah, I think probably one of the biggest mistakes I probably make as a starting point is not consuming liquids early in a race to the point where I'm probably at deficit, and it's too late, isn't it? There's no coming back from that deficit once it hits you, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is that for some people, if they are not heavy sweaters, they can easily do the marathon just having the occasional sip of water along the way. But for someone who is a heavy sweater, that by the end, that is a massive deficit that you're going through. And it's not like you're not drinking at all, but it is not enough to make up for it. So that's why definitely doing that sweat test, as a starting point, I would recommend, I don't know if you've done this, just weighing yourself, going for a run, and before and after. So at least it gives you an idea of how much fluid you're losing over that duration. And then, of course, based on that, at least it starts giving you an insight into, let's say you are losing 2 liters an hour, which is totally possible. I've seen people like losing up to 3 liters an hour, which is just crazy if you imagine drinking that. But it happens. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to drink the 2 liters, but it means that at minimum having 1 liter an hour is going to be beneficial in this case. And of course, that's where the gut also comes to play. Because if you are someone who's, yes, you're running the marathon, obviously you're going at high pace. I'm sure that very unlikely you are drinking 1 liter right now per hour, because it's very challenging, right? Yep. But if you get used to like, okay, no, you know what? I'm going to have training sessions. And when I do my tempo and when I do my threshold, I'm going to make sure I am drinking water because that's the pace I'm going to be running the marathon. and you get used to it.
So we've got someone in who co-hosts this podcast who's famous for pooing in the middle of marathons, and he claims it's got nothing to do with the fact that he smashes 2 scoops of ice cream minimum the night before the marathon, but he also gorges himself the day before as part of the carb loading. Is scoffing ice cream and eating until you drop the night before recommended when it comes to, I guess, carb loading before a marathon?
Oh dear. So carb loading is an effective strategy and is something that absolutely will make a difference in how that marathon goes. Now, the thing is that there's a science to it and an art to it. There are 2 essentially scenarios that I see in terms of mistakes. One is the classic pasta feast the night before, and it's just having a massive pasta bowl or whatever, as many carbohydrates that night. And yes, you're eating carbs, it's going to be helpful, but that is not enough to get that tank of fuel full. The other approach is similar to this unknown individual who is eating all sorts of things that, yes, they are high in carbs. But the issue with most of those foods that you're listing is that they are really high in fat as well. So what happens is that we're loading on carbohydrates and at the same time we're loading on fat, which means that it makes it really difficult for the gut because it's something that you are not used to doing to start with. And then the next day you're going to have a big effort to stay comfortable. So when we think of carbohydrates, that's what most people will think of. Ice cream, donuts, even pizza. Those are things that, yes, they are high in carbs, but it's not the recommendation to be the priority over the carb loading. There are other foods that we can use. And when someone does a carbohydrate loading right, the very first thing they see is that it's a lot of carbs that you have to eat. We're talking about 8 to 10 grams of carbohydrate per kilo of body weight for at least 2 days. Some people push it to 12 grams. And if we think about it, okay, and let's say a 70-kilo athlete, 700 grams of carbohydrate, that's almost 12 cups of rice in one day. Sounds like a lot, I think. But if I tell you that you can have 1 cup of rice with 1 soft drink and have a scoop of ice cream, that I would say, if we can change the ice cream for sorbet, that is way more manageable. And then if in morning tea you have a 2 slices of fruit toast and you add maple syrup to them, and then you have a banana, and on top of that you drink some Powerade, that's another good boost of carbohydrate. So it makes it way more manageable, and the experience, because we're not boosting the fat, is way more comfortable as well. Pizza absolutely can be part of it, but it's not just loading on pizza, literally breakfast, lunch, dinner, eating that, because of course that will be way more fat. But if we say, actually, we can have some pizza the night before and you're used to it, that's fantastic. That obviously is really high in carbs anyway.
So what you're saying, Gabby, is if you get used to eating ice cream the day before a race, then hopefully there's a level of gut training, or should we not recommend ice cream altogether?
I still wouldn't recommend, like look, for example, when I do my carb loading menus for my clients, I do include ice cream. I sell like 1 scoop of ice cream, but I don't say, let's have this tub of ice cream as your carb loading. Because yeah, it's a lot of fat. And even if there's, let's say, some gut training, that's still something that your body needs to process. And I wouldn't be surprised if in case of these toilet stops in the marathon, it's because of all that loading that we did the day before. And of course, the body is trying to digest it. And if you are bouncing up and down when you are running, that obviously triggers more things there.
Definitely. That's good to know. Thanks for bringing that up, Simon. That's good. We seem to refer to this friend on the podcast a lot, but he talks a lot of smack about us and says that, if he were a little bit lighter or, weighed a little bit less, that potentially he'd be faster than Simon and I. Now, I don't like to bring it up because, it's not something we try to aim for, is, talking about weight loss, but I think there is a kind of an art to maybe losing some weight to hit a race weight before you're training for a marathon. But I guess you might be able to provide some insight into how someone goes about doing that, whether it be during their marathon block or they allow for a period of time before they start training.
Thank you. So I love that you're asking this question, because it's something I'm so passionate about. And I think someone if someone's been following me in social media for a while, they know that something that gets me going when I hear this. And the thing is that before we move into, oh, this is how you lose weight in preparation for the marathon or whatever race, the question is, do you have to? And the thing is that weight is something that, because we and quote unquote can change, because yes, if you eat more, you're going to gain weight. If you eat less, you're going to lose it. But the question is, do we need to and should we be doing that? If I ask a person with an arm span that if they need to stretch their arms, they can swim better, that's ridiculous, right? Like there's no way they can do that because that's as far wide their arms go. If I ask a basketball player that they actually need to be taller in order to be better basketball players, there's nothing we can do about it. And when we come to endurance, we ask people to do that. We're telling them that even though their body shape has always been that way, they need to drop weight in order to be faster. Now, yes, obviously, if we see a marathon and we see the people crossing the finish line first, all of them are going to be very light runners, very likely. But is it similar as when we see NBA players? Most of them are going to be 2 meters or taller. And it's the same when we see swimmers. Yes, there are some types of bodies that will naturally be better at that. Now, for the individual that is already that is not in that body type, we still can be faster. We still can have a better result. But in that case, the approach is let's work and play to your strengths. And to do that, the nutrition needs to support that. The approach and what we're seeing nowadays is let's make sure that your trainings are as of best quality as possible. That of course your diet is as balanced and as helpful as possible. And what that individual starts seeing is that first the results are coming because they can see how their body is getting faster, more efficient, stronger. And yes, as a consequence for many people, the body composition changes because yes, the body starts learning that with these adaptations that training is triggering, dropping some fat is going to be helpful while gaining muscle mass. So we do see that difference, but that's never the objective. I always say your ideal race weight is the weight at which you are at on race morning after you have completed a really successful training block and you have eaten as best as possible to support that.
Yeah.
Just to close the argument, one athlete that is pretty much the epitome of this is Christian Blumenfeld. When, for let's say probably a couple of weeks of years ago, around the last Olympic cycle, a lot of people were talking about his body weight. They just couldn't believe how someone who was not looking like a triathlete was having these amazing results and absolutely smashing it. And what the Norwegians learned is that, well, when we play to the strengths, when we optimize every single thing of this individual, instead of doing something that goes against their nature, this person can shine. This person can absolutely thrive.
Is that like a shift in the thinking back in the day? Because I imagine back in the day, it used to be about race weight and being as light on your feet or just having less weight on you as possible. So has that shift been because of, I guess, the science behind nutrition and fueling?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I still think of me as a dietitian back in the day, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm so sorry I did this to you. Because people would come to me, and the very first thing would be, okay, let's assess your body composition and your weight. And okay, 12 weeks to the Ironman, let's make sure that you are at this body weight. And that will be one of the objectives that we will establish. But now that what we're learning is that the information suggesting that race weight was actually based on just models, as in like, oh, I'm going to put numbers here. Now, if we work on physics, yes, a lighter object is going to move quicker. But the thing is that object, which is our body, has a motor. And in order to get that object lighter, we need to underfuel the motor. So how is that, let's say if we're talking about a car, with no fuel, is going to move quicker just because we essentially were dropping things along the way. So there is no evidence to show that asking an individual to deliberately lose weight ahead of a race is going to make them faster. what the evidence is linked with is because they are training better, they are eating better. Yes, they may drop some weight, but if we straight away go, no, we need to make you to lose weight, and that's going to be the thing that is going to make you a successful athlete, there is no single study that proves that, because it's just going against everything that will actually help the person perform well.
I guess one of the other sides, just touching on something you mentioned just a moment ago, was we're talking about being well, like having a proper nutrition plan and training, and training to your strengths. You were talking about potentially building muscle but losing fat, and as a means of changing one's body composition, if that is their goal. It doesn't sound like there's any reason to be putting yourself into a caloric deficit. Does that my understanding?
Yeah, so that's something that I discourage in terms of looking at that caloric deficit, because when we start doing that, and this is something that in the last few years I've been, let's say, more an advocate for, is that often when we, let's say, seek that caloric deficit, well, obviously it's energy that we're not consuming, but it's energy that the body doesn't get for training recovery or for the training session itself. So I'm going to walk you through an example of someone who, let's say, is trying to do that caloric deficit. There is a training session in the morning, fasted training, because obviously saving some calories there, might as well. And then this idea that you're going to burn more fat, so might as well, as you're not eating them and then you're burning more, amazing. Then finish the training session and then just have, let's say, perhaps a protein shake, because protein is important and we must have it. Then heading into work, lunchtime, having a chicken salad, so some chicken, some lettuce, spinach, and veggies, and getting home and absolutely starving. What happens? Chocolate, whatever is in the pantry, biscuits, going for a seconds at night. And that is because obviously the body was in such deficit that it was really difficult to maintain it. That's, let's say, an obvious one. There are other people who come to me as like, no, but I'm so good. I actually, no chocolate in the house. I'm not eating anything. I swear I am strict with my caloric deficit. All right. So, but tell me about how's training going. Well, I actually had an injury last month and I've been struggling to train, and I actually was feeling really tired and I'm sleeping a lot. And when I go on my training sessions on the weekend, I'm struggling. Well, yes, because there is no fuel there, and even essential components for that body are not there. So now the approach I follow is, you know what, you're training, let's focus on that. If the objective is I want to be as fast as possible or complete this distance that now I'm setting myself to do, let's line up the nutrition to help you achieve that goal. And when we do that is, okay, let's make sure you're eating enough, let's make sure this is here. And often what happens is that people who come to me and say, oh, Gaby, I have these sugar cravings at night, or I have a sweet tooth, as soon as we start implementing these changes during their day, they're like, I can't believe I have chocolate and I haven't touched it in a week, because I'm not craving it anymore. And I can't believe I get home from my long run and I'm still doing gardening. I used to be just on the couch the whole day. I can't believe I now have energy to do other things. So what happens there is that now that's how essentially that body composition shift, because the body has more energy to do other things. There's more physical activity, even though it's involuntary, let's say. And those extras that were those calories that the body was overcompensating with are no longer there. So we bring these things to balance. And all starts with that mindset shift. Now we're not seeking that as a result. We're never going to be measuring your body composition. Most people notice it because they got their wetsuit, the wetsuit on, and now it's looser, or they notice it because their clothes are different. But they are like, that's something I don't suggest people to be looking at. It's like, let's measure this, because it just adds a stress and it stops a lot of people from feeling right.
I imagine the other component of it would be someone's mood as well, right? So being at such a deficit, you'll just be an angry fart the whole time because you're just craving and your body is just craving more energy. Whereas if you're just fueling throughout the day, then you'll just be in a better mood for it.
Oh, I love that you mentioned this, because I think it's very interesting that when I'm working with someone, and it's not unusual that someone would come to me and say, my partner says I'm in a better mood now. They don't notice it, but it's the partner who comes and says, actually, you seem better now. Like, I can tell your mood changing. And yeah, absolutely. Definitely being under fuel, even though we think, because there's this assumption, right? it's endurance training. It's very long hours of training. Is sometimes double training sessions. There's a lot going on. And we assume that being always tired, being moody, all these things are normal. And it's almost signs that we're doing it right. But in reality, it's a big sign that the substance, that fuel, is very likely missing.
So one of your big profile clients is, of course, Perth's own Phil Gore. And he's an absolute gun in the sort of the backyard scene. So when working with someone like Phil, what has been, I guess, some of the unique considerations for Phil in particular that perhaps is quite different to the classic ultra runner?
Yeah. So when I first started working with Phil, obviously he was already a very talented athlete. And that to me meant that it was really, really important to work from that baseline. Whatever Phil was already doing, because he was already getting good results, it was important to look at that because clearly something was working for him. So using that is okay, because I can tell, and this is something that I recently shared, when we started to work together, his nutrition intake was quite low. So, okay, looks like you are comfortable with not as many carbs as most people. I'm not going to ask you to now go for 100 because all that's going to do is your confidence is going to go to the floor because there's a lot of anxiety if you go from eating 3 grapes per. This is I'm just making ridiculous. This is not what was happening. But let's say if you go from eating 3 grapes every lap to actually now you have to have this and this and that, like it's a lot. So that was key in terms of we're starting here. Definitely, I can see how you will benefit from having more. Let's work with that. And what I love about working with Phil is that he's so structured. He's so good at looking at his race plans from every single aspect. And it was quite interesting that before we worked together, nutrition was something he was not necessarily looking at. All he had on his plans were lunchtime and he will have something to eat at that time, or dinner time and he will have something to eat at that time. Whereas now, obviously, we've been adding way more structure, and lap after lap, he knows exactly what he's going to eat every single one of those. And that's also the best part of it, that he's really good at literally what is there. That's what he's doing. And that, I think, has been not because he has the discipline and I'm telling that's it, that's what he's doing. It's because we've been working together to the point that what is there is what's best for him. So it makes sense and it works and he's comfortable consuming it. So definitely has been quite a really rewarding experience to see how this collaboration in terms of working with an athlete who is willing to implement the changes, who is listening, who comes back with feedback in terms of, Gaby, I tried this and this is how I felt. Sometimes he comes to me, look, I found this product and it has more carbs. What do you think? And we will use it. So definitely, let's say the methodology behind it doesn't change because that's still at the core of everything I do. But the implementation part of it, 100% is important to look at the individual and what's already working for them so we can build from there.
Yeah, and it goes back to the principles at the start where you were talking about, it's not helpful to go from 0 to 100. Let's look at what the baseline is and just slowly sort of implement small changes and build from there. So that's the same approach that you did with Phil.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, for example, if I'm working with someone who is, Gaby, this is my first backyard ultra, I have no idea what I'm doing. This is what I used to do for my marathons. It will be similar. Okay, well, looks like you're comfortable with this brand. Excellent. But for a backyard ultra, we can't just rely on these things. It's not going to be helpful for you, especially if you want to push for a very long time. So, okay, let's start incorporating things, but always meeting the person where they're at instead of just saying, oh, here's the backyard ultra plan, just follow this and you're going to be so successful, because that of course never is going to work.
Just going to fire a few quick questions, Gaby, if that's okay. We've got a few little questions here that, we could probably, and you've probably touched on a few of them already, but I think what the first one being, a carb load. You mentioned that, some people just go for the pasta the night before, but I guess generally what would you recommend for a carb load for a marathon, whether it be 2 days or 3, or how can someone really break it down and simplify it?
Yeah, definitely. So yes, the average would be 2 to 3 days. For a marathon, I would say 2 days is enough. I will encourage someone to pursue 3 days if they are going to aim for a lower consumption of carbohydrates, so at least they can over the carb loading period, they are consuming enough carbohydrates. So I essentially 8 to 10 grams of carbohydrate per kilo of body weight per day. This is very important, not through the whole carb loading period. And what we want to see first, I do encourage people to at minimum, if they can, before the marathon, because you have your long runs, at least try one day. Try one day of eating that amount of carbohydrate before that long run. So you can see if you're going to be comfortable. Because if you are waiting until the marathon to do this, as many people get surprised, is, oh, wow, I didn't know it was that much food. And if you try this beforehand, yes, you learn that it's a lot of food, but then we can also work on the tweaks, right? Okay, but what if we add soft drinks? Or what if we add the carbohydrate drinks? What if we add sugar to your breakfast? Those things, what they do is adding those carbohydrates while reducing the volume of food. So definitely trying it one day. The next thing is that one. Don't be afraid to add some sugars, because that's going to be helpful. Doesn't mean that all you have to consume is sugar, because that what that does is that is not as beneficial. Obviously, you're not feeling satisfied, it's not comfortable. So it's finding that balance. If you the examples I'm sharing is having that mix. We have the breakfast and we're adding maple syrup. We have the snack and we have some jam on the toast. We have the lunch and we have a lemonade with it. So that is adding some sugar, and that's helping in reducing the volume. I remember once I was, when I was doing CrossFit years ago, one of the coaches was standing at the corner of the room and they were eating a jar of Nutella, literally like that, because they were quote unquote carb loading for their CrossFit competition. Back then I was already a dietitian. Obviously, my approach is, if you don't ask, I'm not going to say anything. So I didn't say anything, but I'm just looking at this person and be like, this is going to be a disaster. Because obviously Nutella is fantastic. It's high in carbohydrates, but it's a lot of fat as well. It's very similar to the ice cream approach. And what that does is very likely a big gut upset. Now, if I had seen her having a bagel with Nutella, I would have been like, amazing. This is fantastic. This is a really good carb approach to this. So having that mix is going to be really helpful.
And how about, we mentioned before fasted runs, and potentially doing that for an easy run or whatnot. Is there any benefit to that, or do you recommend to your athletes that most of their runs are fueled in a way to train their gut, or for whatever reason it might be? Most
of the time, I do recommend people to eat before the training sessions. There are particular scenarios where we could say, okay, fasted training works. One is I work with people who need to be running like at 3 a.m. in the morning because they have work at 5 a.m. or start day very early. And even saying half a banana is too much, or it feels really uncomfortable at that time of the day and the session is going to be easy, okay, that's fine, let's not have it. But because most of the people I work with are ultra athletes, that banana, and I'm saying banana because it's an easy example of 30 grams of carbs, which is helpful, but a piece of toast, whatever easy thing is there, what that's doing is getting you comfortable. Because when you go into an ultra, you're going to hit the aid station, you're going to eat something solid, and then you'll have to keep running. When you're in a backyard ultra, you have 5 minutes to eat your meal, and then you need to keep running. So the more we can stimulate that adaptation, the better. And the best thing is that it's not just from that angle, it's also for the quality of the training session. If we're fueled beforehand, is giving our body the resources to have a better training session. Mm-hmm. Now, when could it be okay to, let's say, do those fasted training sessions? When we're peaking them, I would say max 1 hour, very easy, aerobic, and other opportunities that if you have threshold or other sessions in the morning, definitely fueling those. It's like, okay, that's not bad. We're still getting the benefit of the gut training. This session is not as critical in terms of fueling, but I still would say, if you can, please do. If that's an option and you're comfortable doing it, I still think is going to be way more beneficial than seeking that fat adaptation that for most people, especially the longer you're running, occurs nonetheless. Your body is using fat. Even if you're downing the carbohydrates all the way, your body is still going to use a lot of fat as part of that process.
And how about post-workout or run? I mean, we talked a lot about the pre, but how important is it to fuel your body after you've finished a run?
Yeah. So after training, definitely very important. The way I explain it is there is your body transforms into a sponge, essentially, when you finish your training session. And it means that what you're fueling with is going to go straight to where your body needs it the most. Most people go straight for the protein because in the fitness space, protein has been the nutrient that is the recovery nutrient. In the endurance world, carbohydrate is critical because while you were exercising, your glycogen stores were going down. And when you finish your training session, when you consume that carbohydrate, it's 100% going to go to the glycogen. It's not going to go, oh, I'm going to offset my calories. No, seriously, that is supporting that recovery. So the next training session, now you have fuel in the tank. The benefit of adding protein is that, yes, you need it. It helps repair your muscle, and it also helps with the absorption of the carbohydrate. So when we're thinking of post-training recovery, I always suggest thinking carbs and protein. And for example, people doing it in the morning, literally eggs on toast, you're ticking the box. Having a smoothie with oats, milk, and yogurt and banana, that is another recovery thing. There is no need to have the particular recovery product from X brand. Situations when it works, well, actually, I'm going to be in the car for hours from my training session because I don't have time and I need to go to work. Okay, let's have that recovery thing because it's so easy to have powder, water, and then that's it. But definitely, the sooner we can do it, the more beneficial it's going to be. I recently shared a video because Phil tagged me. Literally, he stops his watch and he's down in his recovery. Doesn't have to be that dramatic. We can at least, let's say, have half an hour, 1 hour, 2 hours is as far as I will push it. But if you're able to bring it early, it's going to be more helpful.
What's the impact of if you do go beyond that 2 hours and you push it to 3 or 4? What is the impact on your body? From having done that,
the recovery is more delayed, let's say, but it's still helpful. Let's say that because you are new to this, and yes, you are like, amazing, I'm going to have my recovery smoothie, and then you forget and you go on with your day. Please still have it by the time you remember. Still going to be helpful. But because I don't want people thinking of this and being like, oh, I have ruined my training because I didn't eat within 2 hours. That's not the case. There's still benefit in consuming that energy, those resources. But if we take longer, it's going to be harder for our body to recover adequately because let's say what is called a big window of opportunity starts getting smaller and the body is less efficient at sending that exactly to where you need it. So that's why it's not as ideal, but it's still going to be helpful. Your body still eventually is going to be able to put it where it needs to be.
And what about something like pickle juice? That seems to get brought up quite a lot, especially in relation to resolving issues with cramps. Is there anything behind that, or is it there's no real science?
So because cramps are so difficult to study, let's say the evidence behind pickle juice is not really strong, and that's because the studies, the way they do them, they have to stimulate a cramp on the person. Like, it's not like you just essentially expect the cramp to happen. They have to trigger it. And what pickle juice has shown is that the severity and the duration of the cramp is likely decrease with pickle juice. So it's not a strategy that will help if you are using pickle juice to prevent the cramp. But if you're someone who has history of cramps and you're already trying absolutely everything, it doesn't hurt to have one of those small bottles of pickle juice with you. So if you have a cramp, you can straight away go for it and hope that at least the severity of that cramp will be reduced.
Yeah, cool. And probably another viral nutrient going around was like bicarb soda to offset lactate. Is there anything behind that, or are we kind of pushing something uphill?
No, absolutely. So when I often I wouldn't say I laugh, but I find it amusing that when we look for supplements, there are a million out there. But when we look at supplements that have evidence of working, they are the cheapest ones. Is bicarb soda, caffeine, and I know that you had listed beetroot. That also helps. Now they have different effects, and this is where it's important to highlight. Bicarb soda has so much evidence behind it in team sports, sprinters, and things that are of power, so weightlifters. And that is because of that lactate effect, right? Like essentially what bicarb soda is doing is it has a buffering effect. So that burning sensation, let's say, is less thanks to the usage of bicarb soda. The reason it's becoming so popular now is because the endurance world is starting to explore it. And that is something that in terms of evidence behind it, there's really not much. But it's one of those things that, because we're looking at people like Blumenfeld, Kipchoge, David Roche, people who are at that peak. Well, you're at that point where let's see what else we need to have to keep reaching higher and higher. For the lay population, I would say there is not something I would prioritize to use, because first off, those people I mentioned, they are pushing really high intensities. And in situations where, let's say in an endurance event, you need to sprint up the hill or you need to have this burst of energy, could be really helpful to have this. But for most of us, there's better benefit from investing your energy and time in other strategies that will give you way more leverage and advanced benefit from using it.
Yeah, that's really good to know, and I think the listeners will, I think, value that a lot. One of the things that people talk about is the way a full strength Coke hits, either whether it be at the end of your race or maybe you've come off the bike in your Ironman and you're going into your marathon. Again, probably pure sugar, but like, are there better substitutes for Coke, or should we be looking at other things?
Yeah, so Coke has, let's say, a bad reputation in general across the population, right? Like that is something that, if we look at the media, that's something that they are saying, don't drink this, it's bad for you, it's not good for your health. But if I am standing in the middle of a ultra marathon holding a Coke, I'm going to be the most popular person there, like to give, especially if I'm far from the aid station, right? Someone is going to be really happy to get that Coke, and I'd be very happy to give them that Coke as well.
Yeah, okay.
Because yes, it has carbohydrate, it's a lot of sugar for sure, and that's why obviously in the general population, having, let's say, even me sitting right now sipping a Coke probably won't be beneficial because not something that my body is using right now. But in a situation like that, that sugar is going to be helpful. The other thing that Coke is giving you is caffeine, and that also has benefits. So that's why a lot of people notice this boost, let's say, because is that sugar is really quick to absorb. There's some caffeine associated to it, so it is helpful. Now, I don't recommend using Coke as a strategy per se, as like, oh, let's make sure that your marathon you have these many Cokes per hour or anything like that. But I do suggest including it as part of the approaches. For example, in the case of the Ironman athletes I work with, we normally look at the second half of the marathon that they started reaching for the Coke as they are reaching the aid stations. In the case of ultra endurance, there are, for example, in we had the satellite champs for the backyard, Phil Gore has on his plan, there was a lap where he was eating chips and Coke. And Phil wanted to, because he was doing shout outs for his sponsors, and he wanted to do a video with me giving him his nutrition. And then we look at the plan, I was like, chips and Coke. And Craig, who was the guy recording the video, are you sure you want to give him this? Like, it would be so funny that dietitian is giving him that. And I was like, you know what? I love it, because I need people to see that these can be fueled in the adequate context. This is treasure. This is something really helpful. So it absolutely, there's a place for foods like this. Now, does this mean that essentially the 102 hours of Phil's record were fueled by chips and Coke? Absolutely not. But definitely they have a place there, and they can be quite helpful in certain circumstances.
I think the Coke strategy came about. I was talking to Ian Gibbs, he's the race director of Bunbury Running Festival, and he was saying back in the day when there was no such thing as nutrition, that was all they had. They basically had Coke in diluted amounts over time, and then towards the end, you're just smashing straight Coke as a way to get yourself that hit to finish. But I suppose, the times of nutrition has changed, but still an effective way of giving yourself that boost in a marathon situation. And I think Andy Buchanan has made Coke more popular again as someone that smashed a bit of Coke towards the end as he reached his marathon record.
Yeah, there's a very, I think it was like a viral reel that went on, and it's footage of cyclists, and from 20 years ago, I don't remember, actually not 20, probably even more. And what you can see is how they are stopping and going for the Coke, and they are eating chocolates as they're going. Obviously, the bikes look absolutely different to what we see these days. But at the end, that concept is still there. Of course, we need the carbohydrate. Yes, we're getting these days more efficient. So people learn, hey, this Coke thing is quite helpful. What if we package it in the form of a gel and we add caffeine to it, so that way the person can be carrying it and consuming it? Fantastic. Yes, let's do that, because it's way more practical as well and easier to have more of it. So But yeah, if you were going back to, let's say, those basics or having something like that, know that there are situations in which it's going to be very helpful.
Beautiful. Gaby, what you've shared is absolutely awesome. So how do the listeners reach out and get in contact with you?
Probably the best social media platform will be my Instagram. So I am there as at IntensEATfit. Otherwise, there's also my website, which is same name, IntensEATfit.com. I have a free newsletter that I send every week where I share highlights in endurance nutrition and recommendations for products. So you can sign up straight from my Instagram link as well. And obviously my email, if you want to reach out directly, more than happy to answer any questions or connect with people who want to have a chat.
Beautiful. Excellent. Well, we really appreciate your time and sharing your wisdom with us. Thank you for sharing your tips and your stories with us. And thanks for joining us on the WA Running Podcast.
Oh, thank you for the invite.
That was our chat with Gaby. A lot of interesting information, which included some advice about whether or not we are or should be eating ice cream before a race. So any things you've picked up from that chat?
Yeah, look, eating things with high fat content the night before a marathon, probably not high on the priority list. And look, deep down, I already knew that. I just needed someone with a scientific background to tell me that. So I think from now on, potentially, it'll either be a less indulgent single scoop before a race, or maybe just no scoops at all, depending on how determined I'm feeling.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, she didn't define how big the single scoop was going to be, so you could, find a loophole and do a massive single scoop. She did suggest sorbet as a healthy alternative as well. So
true.
That's
more
always
carbs, less fat. Yeah. Look, I have the kids do eat a bit of sorbet around the house, so sometimes they open the freezer and find that Dad's been in there and done a bit of Bitcoin mining in the sorbet. So
it's good to see. Now, look, that was I think the biggest learning for me is the concept of still eating something before any run that you do. I think it's very easy for us to just go on a fasted run thinking that it's just an easy run. You don't need anything to fuel you for that. But I suppose I've never really thought of it from the perspective of gut training and just getting your body used to having something in your system and going for a run. So I found that a good learning from me to sort of take into consideration as I start building my mileage. And I think we did talk about whether or not I would do a sweat test. So it might be something for me to consider before I do a big marathon block.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like, I think I may have mentioned it off air on the pod on the record with Gaby, but I feel like having a nutrition coach is something that I could benefit from greatly, because my discipline with regards to running doesn't relate necessarily to me being able to get out for a session. It relates to me not being able to contain myself when I get home and just being exceptionally indulgent. So and running for rewards and so having the 2 scoops the night before and maybe having 3 scoops the night after. So like those kinds of things I think it's where I would benefit greatly. So yeah, it was really interesting to chat with Gaby, and we probably didn't touch on a whole heap of other things to do with like micronutrients and all these other things that are kind of coming up in conversations these days. But I'm sure we can have her on again at some point in the future and address a few of the questions we didn't get around to asking this time.
Yeah, no, I'd be keen to get her back, particularly as people's marathon training or ultra marathon training ramps up over the course of 2025, and might get her back, and perhaps we could do a call out to listeners to ask any questions we can fire Gaby's way. So so we'll look forward to having her back. So let's move to upcoming events, Chris.
Yeah, so the one we've been talking up for a little while, coming up this Saturday, the 18th of January, we've got the Night of the Go for 2 and 5, hosted by Aths West. It's the State 5,000 champs. There will also be community runs, of which we took part last year. Simon, are you taking part this year, or are you taking care of Miata?
So look, it was meant to be Linda's birthday dinner with her mates, which was the reason why I was unable to make it initially. But thankfully, that has been rescheduled. So I can now make the 5,000 meters community run, not the state champs. So we'll see if sub 18 is on. I'm not feeling confident after the Matilda Bay Run yesterday, but we'll see how we go. We might, I might try and cook or be cooked. Find out on Saturday night.
Yeah, well, there will be a few of us on that kind of sub 18 train, I think, and so hopefully we can all take care of each other, and hopefully it's not too windy, and it doesn't look like it's going to be too warm, so there shouldn't be any excuses for us to make if we don't do it.
Yeah, well, I'm sure we'll find one.
Yeah, no doubt. We've also got the Perth Trail Series Sly Fox coming up on Sunday the 19th. That's at Langford Park in Jarrahdale. We've got the WMC Peninsula Run on Sunday, February 2nd. There's a 5K and 10K there. This year it's being held at 5 p.m. Probably making up for the no New Year's run that was last year. I think usually they have the PM New Year's run, but maybe they didn't. Maybe they've canned that one and potentially keeping this a twilight run for the next couple of years. The big one, I guess, is the Busso Bay Run on February 8th, I believe. So
yes.
Saturday the 8th. That's got all distances, but I mean those tickets sold out day of. It's going on sale. So Double Run Club will be hosting their championship race there in all distances, I'd imagine. But I guess that probably brings us to one of our big announcements, right?
Yep. So, shall we talk about our next community run?
Yeah. So we've managed to lock in Friday, the 7th of February, as a shakeout run prior to the Busso Bay Run. It's partnering with the Running Centre, and On Running will be there also with some kit to try on, I believe.
I believe we've got Vlad back on as well for this community run as well.
Yeah, so Vlad will be there again with his Bix nutrition and electrolytes. But yeah, that'll be a morning run held at 6 a.m. So basically a shakeout 24 hours before the Busso Bay Run starts. We're very grateful to Sam and Raf for kind of helping us out with this one. And it sounds like we will be kind of partnering at least for the next few community runs and try and engage a few more people. So Saturday, I keep saying Saturday, it's Friday the 7th of February. Keep an ear out. We'll announce something on socials this week, and we'll be hammering you with stories in the lead up to that date. So looking forward to that.
Let's move to our favourite segment, which is the weapons of war.
Yeah, well, the much anticipated car marathon happened over Christmas, and Mitch Gray completed that and has seemingly been back on the road since. So it looks like he's got out of it injury free, which is fantastic to see. Ryan Bourne, aka the Real Windmill, he completed the Goggins Challenge, which, as we understand, is 4 miles per hour for 48 hours.
4 miles every 4 hours, I think.
Oh, okay.
So he got a 3 hour break.
Right. Okay. Well, maybe not as weaponish as I'd initially thought, but nevertheless, still pretty brutal. And he punished himself a little bit further by listening to us and banter away in the middle of the night, which our wives, my wife's sitting over on the couch right now and wishing I'd probably keep it down a little bit.
No comments.
No, that's me staring off into the distance, waiting for a hand in the back of the head. We also had some unfortunate hacking of people's Instagram accounts. We had Nita, WAMC member. She was posting stuff about her new cars and new houses and how a certain Bitcoin or crypto kind of genius had enabled her to secure all of these new purchases, but it turned out that it was all a hack. And as entertaining as it was, I'm sure Nita didn't find it very entertaining having to start a new Instagram account. So apologies for that, Nita. I did see, and I have seen, this has been an ongoing problem for me, but I've seen a few people when they go to Bold Park, they do a couple of laps, and the people who are guilty of this will know who they are, but they pick up, I don't know, little blue tongue lizards and take photos of them. Should we really be handling these reptiles? Who knows? But yeah, they look like they're happy.
Be careful the reptiles.
Yeah, the reptiles. Big Gif's just got no shirt on usually. Yeah, and then the other thing was people making it clear that when they go on a run with some friends of theirs, that that's their friend's pace. That's not their pace. So I don't care what pace you're running. A run's a run. Carry on, move on.
Thank you, Dan Bowbridge, for that nomination.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. And finally, I've seen a few people posting photos of their treadmill readings. David Newen. If you're not game enough to go outside and prove you ran with a GPS map, don't bother justifying that your treadmill run existed. Like, tready runs are fine, and I'm going to shout out Tready Run right now. Actually, this is another weapon one that's not on our list, but we identified yesterday was Narishka Irvine running at 2.5 hour longie yesterday on the treadmill, and all of her runs this week of about 90 kilometers total were on a tready. So kudos to you, Narishka. That's absolute gun weapon behavior.
Yeah. I don't think she took many pictures of the treadmill readings. I think they were mostly watch readings.
Yeah, true.
And pictures of the treadmill itself.
Yeah.
So I feel like that was okay.
That's a loophole.
Yeah. That's okay. But if you're like David, where you take a picture of the reading itself on the treadmill, maybe that's unacceptable.
Yeah. Just we need a bit of context. You know, are you in the gym? Are you at home? Are you at one of those things in the middle of a shopping centre, you know, just getting a massage on the chair, you know, trying out a tready? Look, we just want to know a bit more, that's all.
Yeah, no, that's all good. Look, thank you to those that have tagged us in Strava posts over the last 3 weeks and the DMs with your respective nominations. It's really appreciated. So hopefully we don't get any backlash after that segment, but keep these nominations coming. We'll endeavour to call people out accordingly. That's it for us. So our socials, we are over 724 members on Strava. So keep them coming, and thank you for your support. We do have 953 followers on Instagram, so we're still a fair bit behind Jack Crago, but Jack, we're coming. I'm sure you've got 40,000 followers, but our aim this year is to creep slowly to your levels. So we'll try and do our best to increase the follower count this year. Our Instagram is WARunningPod. Our email is warunningpodcast@gmail.com. And our Strava group is Warp. Thank you for listening to us on our first episode back in 2025, and we'll see you next week.
See you guys.